How's it going, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the James Loud Podcast. Today, my special guest is Jason Hadley from Lighthouse. How are you doing today, Jason?
I am fantastic, and it is an honor and a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man. So we've known each other a while. I met you through...
I want to say we got connected through Autumn Carsey. I think that name.
Maybe
that
Autumn.
name?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah.
She's been on the podcast before.
Right. Isn't it crazy how it's just like this huge industry, but it's such a small world? I mean,
it's a little bit incestuous.
But
in a good way. In a good way, right?
Yeah. I mean, you're right. I mean, because Alabama's not legal, right? At this point. So they haven't legalized yet.
So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and how you get your start in the cannabis industry?
Yeah, for sure. So again, my name's Jason Hadley. I'm currently with a company called FILTR that's owned by Lighthouse Worldwide Solutions. And it's just sort of a funny way that you like fall into cannabis. I was not the cool kid in class, right? And so at some point, I didn't really discover cannabis until probably like maybe my senior year of high school, and it was funny because like when I first started smoking, like it was like close to the last day of school in high school. And wouldn't you know it, who do I see smoking weed in the parking lot at school, but like this rival guy that used to bully me all the time, right? And then it turns out I see him, he sees me, we lock eyes, and I look at him and I'm like, dude, I'm not going to bust you. And we sat there and we smoked a doob in the school parking lot together. I've never seen him since, but everything was squashed in that moment.
Yeah,
and
that's awesome.
It was wonderful. That was like one of those moments where I was like, man, this thing really brings people together. You know what I mean? Like, it's one of the few drugs you do in a circle, right?
For sure.
Nobody's ever like got their cocaine on a lazy Susan, right?
Well, not in this country, maybe.
Right. So anyway, I go to college, I do the rigmarole, I buy the American Dream hook, line, and sinker type of thing. I'm in a sales job, I get laid off. And then a buddy of mine, while I was collecting unemployment, was like, hey, do you want to come trim weed for me or with me? For a grower, I know it's cash under the table. This was the legacy market days. So I was like, yeah, sure, I would love it. And so I go and I meet this guy, Sky Hank, if you're familiar with Sky Hank at all, from Smoke and Mirrors. And he
Absolutely.
I
actually know him from Autumn as well.
Yeah, right. And so it turns out like I'm trimming for him. And because I had like an actual working career outside of cannabis, it turns out I showed up on time. I knew how to read. I knew how to write. I was dependable. I'd follow through, stuff that's like kind of valuable in cannabis. You don't see a lot of that at the time, right? And so then they're like, hey, do you want to work for us? And so then I become the weekend guy and I start learning the ins and outs of plant management and facility management. We're talking like a 5,000 square foot facility. I mean, by today's standards, practically cottage grow, right? And anyway, so then I go to become the weekend manager, and just like any chef wants to start their own restaurant, I got it together to get my own commercial cultivation, and we took over somebody else's problems, for lack of a better term, right? I mean, it was like the build out was, designed by Dr. Seuss, and, anything that could go wrong would. And, my grows would have never passed compliance testing in today's age. But, and then I was running that for a little while until the cops said, yeah, maybe you shouldn't be growing anymore. And came in and took the whole thing down. And so then I turned out at that time, Sky Hank had invented SmartBee controllers, and which was, for those of you out there that may not know, it was a small, it still is, it exists. It's a small like wireless communication sensor device. Think of it like a wireless Trollmaster system for your 50 light and under crowd primarily. But and then SmartBee shut down. I spent a little time swimming around at Spectrum King until I figured out what I wanted to do. And it turned out that the FILTR guys wanted to buy SmartBee a long time ago. And I had met them back then, and then they invented this FILTR product. So they called me up and they said, hey, do you want to make a change? And they didn't even have to put the question mark on the end before I was like, yes, let's do this. And so I come to find out that these FILTR guys, who I know nothing about, are part of this much larger company called Lighthouse Worldwide Solutions. And their bread and butter is like think of it as like FDA compliant Trollmaster systems. So their primary market is like pharmaceutical, semiconductor, aerospace, clean room manufacturing.
Right.
And they do the systems for that. I mean, they're not obviously measuring like DLI and PAR and stuff. They're measuring particles and air differential pressures coming from different doorways and stuff like that. So, the sophistication was a little much. It's much for this industry at this point in the industry. At some point, regulation may call for it, but that's a whole other. We talk about that later.
Yeah.
But anyway, so, they're like, listen, you know how to grow, you know how to talk to stoners, you know the market. We'll teach you everything you need to know about microbe control as it pertains to cannabis. And I was like, sweet ass, where do I start?
Just a quick question. I heard a rumor that you had to have a black belt to get into Lighthouse.
Isn't that
and they
the
jumped you in.
Right. No, I decided to get sexed in. I'm not doing that. It turns out, so Lighthouse Worldwide Solutions, it was started by this lady named Dr. Tae-Young Kim, who is the highest ranking female Taekwondo practitioner in the world. And so somehow or another, I don't know where this leap came from, but at some point she's opened up a karate school or a Taekwondo school. She came from Korea with like dollars in her pocket and did all of the American dream stuff to get, to owning her own studio. And then all of a sudden she decided she wanted to start like a particle counting business. I don't know where that comes from, but hey, here we are, right? So it turns out all of the C team is like her black belt students. So the president of the company is like a 5th degree black belt. My boss is a 5th degree black belt. His boss is a 5th degree black belt. Inside the lobby of the building, like it was a surreal thing because it's just not used to the corporate environment I've worked in previously. But the lobby was lined with magazines, Black Belt magazine, Taekwondo magazine, and like they're all covers that Dr. Kim and all of the C team were like cover models for, like whatever you call that, the equivalent in martial arts publishing. But, they're like breaking boards and catching arrows and stuff like that. And even in the break room, like the CEO of the company standing on a rock, shirtless with a bandana, like, doing cool, like mountaintop poses. And with that, though, I will say that because of that, like that, made me feel really good as a company because, like typically martial arts is very, based in like honor, respect, those types of things that not that like backbiting that you see at like other job environments, you know what I mean? And so,
right.
And they've been very nurturing and supporting along the way and helped me to develop my skills. They're allowing me to get certifications in certain things to grow my knowledge base so that I can be more effective for my customers. And so, 4 years later, here we are. I think I'm in my 5th year now that I'm thinking about it, but the time flies by and they've just been great. And, I figured it like this, is it's like, I don't need to know more about growing. There's plenty of guys that know how to grow fire. I just need to know more about one particular aspect of it that everybody else doesn't.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And be able to specialize in that because, it's not just like hawk and air filters and particle counters. It's like, it's being of service. It's helping these, growers like cut a learning curve that state compliance threw on them. And the problem that they're facing is like the equivalent of being told you have ghosts in your building. Yeah, go find the ghost in your building. You know what I mean? But luckily enough, there's actually a lot of commonalities between clean room manufacturing and where cannabis really should be operating at in order to maintain consistent testing success.
Awesome. So you work with Peter McGuire too?
I do.
And
work
he's
with
a black
Peter
belt.
McGuire. He is very much a black belt.
Yeah.
And he's a really wicked smart dude. And
Super
he's mentored
smart.
me along the way. And, Peter also is a member of the cannabis section of ASTM. Mm-hmm. So they're coming out with standards because that's the thing about cannabis is that, as we know in our early days, you had to be part plumber, part electrician, part carpenter. I almost electrocuted myself cutting a pigtail for a cord that was still plugged into the wall, right? We don't know what we don't know sometimes, right?
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of standards in telling you how you should operate, So I often tell my clients, like, it's sort of like if you were lost in the forest, you'd watch what the rabbits eat, And so if you're looking to like kind of mimic a higher standard, a lot of people tend to kind of glom onto hospital standard because it's what we see more often. We don't, not a lot of people are in clean rooms, and that's by design, actually. And so, with that, though, hospitals are fighting different things than cannabis is fighting. So, when it comes to operating, I tell people if you could live at pharma at the top end and food manufacturing at the bottom end, if you could live in that butter zone, you're usually going to be pretty good from run to run, and you should be running a pretty tight ship.
Awesome.
I love what I do. I mean, that's the funny part. Like, I found a home in cannabis as far as like, maybe one day I'll be at another company. Maybe one day I'll start my own company. Who knows what the future holds for me? But what I do know is that this environment is very much feels like home to me compared to other types of industries I've worked in the past.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a great industry. And I think, we're lucky to have people like you that do a lot of hand holding in this industry too, like getting in and kind of explaining. Cause I feel like there's definitely like a learning curve for a lot of people that are coming from cannabis into clean room practices. And you got yourself and you got Peter that are going around, Peter's done some lecturing. I've been to some of his lectures on clean rooms, and, I've talked to you on the phone when we were getting our filters installed. I think that's great to be able to have that, not just the expertise, but being able to walk people through knowing that they're in a place where they could use help, and to get them the help that they need that's going to improve the quality of what they're doing.
Yeah, wholeheartedly. I mean, it's so often that like the industry doesn't know what it doesn't know. You know what I mean? And what's nice though is that you can feel, as I was saying today to a client, I was like, you can feel the yearning for the learning, know, and because like legacy market days from a cleanliness standpoint, it was more about vanity because the accountability was you were only held to weight, bag appeal, and potency. Other than that, you just used to cut the bad part off and put the rest in the turkey bag.
Right.
And now it's like things have changed. I have to explain to my clients, like, dude, the reason you're allowed to operate in the open is because, that the state is willing to let you operate in the open is because you have to meet a minimum product safety standard. You know what I'm saying? That's the trade-off. Okay, we'll let you operate legally, but you can't put like moldy bunko boof out on the market. Like that ain't, that's not how that's going.
Not in this state. No.
But, right.
I mean, overall.
Yeah. Overall, I mean, that's, sort of the thing. The interesting part is that while they put these testing mandates in place, it just simply says they haven't really cared how you operate up until the point of testing. Right. You know what I'm saying? In other words, like they're not telling you what you have to do on a day-to-day basis. They're just saying this bag, this turkey bag, this pound has to be in X state of compliance,
Right.
And, that's starting to change a little bit now. And so it's hilarious because like Peter and I have been sort of like, I've always kind of felt a little bit like Chicken Little, like a little alarmist going like, stop using single bucket mops. You got to use double and triple bucket mops, and I know sometimes I sound like a crazy person about it, but at the same time, it's like, there's not a lot of future proofing that happens in cannabis because it's not a very proactive industry as much as it's a reactive industry.
Or it has been in the past.
Yeah, we're correct. Right. I mean, yeah. And in my observation, most of the time, like an investor isn't necessarily going to want to build the grow room of the cultivator's dreams.
Right.
You know what I mean? They're just like, no, we want to be able to make back our investment. Maybe when we've made like 5x our investment, we'll start talking about improvements or whatever that benchmark is,
Well, and very few people are prepared for what's coming with federal legalization and the possibilities of, the standards that they will have.
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, so it's funny because we've always had these conversations around the water cooler, so to speak. I mean, granted, I work at a home office, so it's a rather lonely water cooler, but I'm kidding. But it's kind of like as we've talked and strategized over the years, and the prevailing theory was that when federal legalization came, that even if it wasn't necessarily the FDA that was going to be mandating operation standards, it would be some sort of organization under the FDA who would probably still pull the current FDA regulations. A case in point, like a lot of state license criteria was pulled from something called the U.S. Pharmacopoeia. I mean, it was straight lifted right off the page and copied and pasted right on their website. The U.S. Pharmacopoeia is the organization that develops the standards that are used in pharmaceutical manufacturing. The FDA is the enforcement body of the U.S. Pharmacopoeia. And so the U.S. Pharmacopoeia, like I said, they if you look it up, their testing standards are the same as like Michigan, California, several others that have 4 types of aspergillus that are detect, non-detect. If they're rocking that kind of stuff, it's usually like they lifted it from the USP. Well, so if they're going to lift the testing standards from the USP, well, what are the odds they're probably going to lift the operating standards from there as well?
Right.
And so you're starting to see a little bit of that change start to creep in, where it's not necessarily taking the federal level green light to make things happen. Some of these states are starting to take operating standards at a federal level and apply them at the state level. So take for example, state of New York just recently legalized, and the state of New York is requiring that you be adherent to, ready for this, everybody out in podcast land, write this down, 21 CFR Part 117. And that is the regulation set for the manufacturing of human food.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's how every cookie factory operates. That's how every cereal factory, every, potato chip company.
I know one cookie factory that doesn't operate like that.
All right.
We're not going to mention them, but
yeah, fair enough. But yeah. So, but by and large, like those levels of standards. So New York had baked it right in from the jump as far as like right when they legalized. Right. And then Michigan is currently considering the deployment of 117, specifically parts A and parts B, parts A and B, which isn't that big of a deal at this point. I'll say that, because part A is mostly like definitions, like what is a microbe? What is, this, what is that? Part B just basically starts to say that you are becoming, that you have to be CGMP compliant, current good manufacturing practice compliant. And then, but they reserve, in the fine print, it says we reserve the right to enforce later subsequent sections. That's where it gets live. Because like, for instance, part C, you're going to have to start to understand something called HACCP. And HACCP stands for Hazard Analysis Critical Control Points, which is it's a food safety philosophy and practice that originally came about when NASA went to Pillsbury and was like, we need to make sure that there's no food spoilage in space, because who wants the runs in a spacesuit, right? Like, I can't, that's gotta suck. So anyway, so Pillsbury develops this like methodology of being able to like analyze their process, find faults in it, find corrections, preventative actions, those types of things. And so, you're going to start to see this kind of brave new world open up. And, you got the old dogs that are like, well, I didn't get into this business to fill out paperwork. It's like, yes, but businesses and industries evolve, I mean, we're not using wheel-spoked cars, wheel-spoked tires because somebody's like, vulcanization, that's devil talk, like nobody does that. Like, things innovate. So unfortunately, most people got into this industry because they didn't want to work a day job or pay taxes. And, so here you are.
I mean, things have definitely evolved.
Yeah, no, I would completely agree. And that's the beauty of it. And that's where I find that I seamlessly slip right in, because you do have these people that want to be at a higher echelon of operation, but they don't know where to turn. They don't know where to look. And the good news is all of that information is all out there. So, it's funny because I sell an air purifier, but my competition isn't the guy making an air purifier across the street. It's change, discipline, My buddy says ...
Right.
My buddy says you should use this.
Little bro science.
Bro science. And so I'm just like, dude, you just need a better class of buddy. That's all.
Right.
So that's where I try to really pride myself on. I'm not going to put anything out information wise that isn't backed up by a source.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And the source is not your buddy.
Right. It's Peter McGuire.
It's Peter McGuire. Totally. Well, he's in Oregon. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on aspergillus and everything, because Oregon tried to pass the law that they were going to about regarding aspergillus and not being in and testing for it.
Right. And they found out. They effed around and found out, right? I mean,
exactly. Everything had aspergillus in it.
Right. Exactly. Literally. Yeah. And I mean, listen, from a cultivator standpoint, I totally get it. I feel the pain point. That section of the country, as far as their growing methodologies, it's very well entrenched in, let's call them old world methodologies, and I respect that. I dig it. You'd be surprised what I've been willing to smoke in my day. So I'd smoke anything from Oregon because I've smoked stuff from Mexico. No problem. It's cool.
Right.
I didn't even know bud came like in a 3-dimensional form. I thought it came as a feather because I didn't understand what Mexican
bricks.
Right. I didn't understand.
It grew in bricks. Right.
Yeah.
It grew in bricks.
I was like, cool. I got the corner of the brick. That's awesome. It's like eating brownies. It's like, so. But anyway, so in Oregon, it's a tough one because I have an unpopular but hot take on it. And it goes a little something like this. Well, we can't grow clean, so we're going to try to reform the laws back to where they originally were. I'm sorry if I pissed off anybody in Oregon. But, at the end of the day, it's like, again, that product safety standard is coming into play. And, the propensity for people getting tainted weed is not all that high. I understand that. But when it hits you, it can be debilitating, particularly because we've been, calling this medicine to make it legal for, 20, 30 years, right? More, right?
Since 96. Longer.
Right. So it's like, if you're going to grow medicine, then you're going to have to make medicine the way medicine's made. This is kind of my take on it. Like I said, hot take, unpopular opinion.
Very unpopular on this podcast. You're going to get a lot of slack for it. I know. And I don't honestly know what the balance is because I think there's a balance. I want to support growers that are growing outdoors in Oregon. I feel like there's a need to support small business, right? So at the end of the day, we want to support small business. Obviously, we want a safe product that's safe for everybody. So maybe the thresholds need to be adjusted. Right. I think that's probably what it's going to come down to.
I think so too. And especially because, if nothing else, like the states are starting to see like revenue spikes in their tax revenue. And,
absolutely.
They don't want that to go away. So if they do have to make it like detect, non-detect, or X number of total coliform units, from your total yeast and mold count, or some sort of give and take. And not only that, but here's the thing is that law, when it was put into effect, was basically like, okay, you guys have to basically change everything you do now. You have an X number long window to make that happen.
Right.
And now everything after that has to be tested. So it's not fair to the growers.
Right.
Because again, a lot of the legacy methodologies just simply don't translate into a compliant world, you know? So let me put it this way. I applaud Oregon for being able to get that repealed. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Because think about it, no other state is getting that kind of lobbying power that they're all of a sudden going to start changing the rules.
Right.
So my hat's off to them personally.
Totally. Well, you have some amazing clean air products.
I do.
You want to tell us a little bit about the product line that you guys have?
Yeah, sure. So we mentioned earlier FILTR. So FILTR is a commercial grade HEPA air purifier. It's the same type of HEPA technology that's used in pharmaceutical clean rooms. It's what you would call a capture and removal type of device. So, the philosophy in clean rooms is they don't care what's in your air. They just want it out of the air. So they don't care if it's dust, if it's mold, if it's, whatever. It's like, if you remove all of the particles, which difficult to do, admittedly difficult to do. But like, if you reduce the particles, you reduce the threat. So most of the problems that start out in our facilities typically tend to come from the air. A lot of times our facilities are negatively pressured, so they're pulling outside air in, especially if you're near places like if you're growing near like a garbage dump, or you're growing near other growers or other industries that have different requirements around their output and pollution levels. Cereal factories, for example, are widely known to, remember, they get their corn and their grains and all that stuff on box cars that are just dumped and siloed into the factory. So all of that stuff that's just sort of rotting is it's still usable for the purpose of making Lucky Charms or whatever, but like cereal has a kill step in it. So the production process, so they can take in like different types of, let's say, stuff you wouldn't normally necessarily eat raw, under its current state when it arrives there. But by the time it's made into a box of cereal, it's perfectly edible, because anything that's been, exposed to that stuff has been killed off in the production process. Meanwhile, their material handling is constantly like pluming molds and such that are coming off of those things. And depending if you're upwind, downwind, whatever, you definitely, there's a propensity for you to be able to pull those problems in. And I've seen it in lab testing. So in addition to the HEPA air purifier, which is continually remediating particles, it's like, at the end of the day, like you need to be able to not just get rid of particles, but it's also very helpful to be able to detect them and identify them in your air. So one of the other devices we manufacture is called called an air particle counter. And what it's designed to do is it's basically pulling air in through a laser or through a box. It's running it past a laser. It's sizing it. It's counting it. It's giving you a number. You can then start to use to understand the volume, or what you would call the particle pressure, the particle burden of your airspace. And that's something that you can use to kind of understand the general cleanliness of your air, but also you can use it to, say, like, start to capture, or how would I say this, potentially start to identify problems that could be in your air. So like, for instance, I'm trying to, as we're talking here, trying to find a doc here that I wanted to show you. Can I share a screen with you?
Absolutely.
Sweet. Okay, so check this out. So this is a falling particle chart. So if you understand the concept that heavier particles are going to fall out of the air faster than smaller particles, you can see here that a 100 micron particle, which would be like roughly the width of a human hair, that's going to fall out of the ground, or it's going to fall to the ground. In this particular case, they're saying it's falling 1 meter. So what they did was they took a glass tube that's 1 meter long, they dropped the particle in it, they timed to see how long it takes to fall. And so a 100 micron particle, the width of your human hair, like takes less than 2 seconds to fall 1 meter. But you have to consider that in cannabis, your smallest particle thread is actually 1 micron and larger. So 1 to 2 microns is like an Aspergillus fumigatus spore, probably one of the smaller ones. But a 1 micron particle will take almost 5 hours to fall 1 meter in perfectly still air, undisturbed by ambient air. So if you think about it, if it takes 5 hours to fall in a tube where nothing's disturbing it, and then you go to an indoor facility and you're dealing with fans on the walls, doors opening and closing, HVAC that's, perhaps intermittently spaced, through the ductwork and stuff like that, you're creating what's called a turbulent airflow environment. So these 1 micron particles, these smaller mold spores, they can stay aloft for indefinitely, frankly, Yeah. And so that's where the idea, and all they're doing is swirling around the air, and they're succumbing to the seas of flow. So every time, like, I'm sure at some point, if you've ever walked past like a candle or something like that, and like the wind from you passing by disturbs the flame,
Sure.
That happens at the particle level too. As well, those particles are also very easy to adhere to our clothing and such. So even if somebody's in scrubs, you got to remember, like, to a 1 micron particle, like, threads are like, giant like anchor ropes, or like those ropes you use in the gym, a little thread that we see in a shirt, right? To us, it looks like more like a hair, but to a 1 micron mold spore, it's much larger. So it's able to adhere easier and then travel about the facility.
So with your particle counter, I think one of the coolest things that you suggested is to actually use it to test before you're doing, like, when either during your build out, before you actually have plants in, and then after, once you have the filter installed, and being able to test the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's called baselining, and that's the technical term, is to baseline a building. So what happens is, like, let's say the last nail and screw goes in, the construction crew leaves, you do your final cleanup, whatever. That would be the time where you would take particle counts to figure out what's going on in there. You would take air samples to see if you can identify anything in your air. I would suggest swab samples as well, water samples. Just test the bejesus out of that place, right? Because you want to know, are there any problems in there that you might be able to catch and remediate before you ever move plants in there? Because if you grow plants on top of a problem, you're just proliferating a problem, right? But then the other side of this too is that you then also have some benchmarks for cleanliness. So now that you know what the building was like before plants ever moved in, your cleaning and testing regimens and stuff, you have something to compare against as you progress through cycle after cycle. So, and then, not for nothing, but I talk to some of my clients about, like, because I'm always helping them to, be successful so that they scale and expand. And if they're thinking about buying a second building, I'm like, let's go in and take some samples now. If you like the building that much, but it's got a problem and you can prove it, then that might maybe give you some negotiating power on price.
Totally. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, or maybe that you might want to avoid it altogether,
Right. Now people, as opposed to 5 years ago, I think a lot of people are thinking, like, what's in the building that I'm going into? What kind of pathogens are already in the building? Yeah.
Oh, and not only that, but understanding the history of that building too. If you're not building from the ground up from scratch.
Yeah.
You find, like, say for instance, in the New England states, like your Massachusetts, Rhode Island areas and stuff like that. I mean, some of that construction's 100 years old.
Yeah. Mold spores. Definitely aspergillus.
Yeah. Definitely aspergillus. And, and so it's like, I'm telling them, man, you got to throw a lot of epoxy around this place. You got to kind of hermetically seal all these problems in, because it's not like you're going to be replacing wood beams and stuff like that, But yeah, it's, you have old construction, but then you also have, like, what was the building used for prior? So, I might not necessarily want to move a cannabis cultivation into, like, something that was manufacturing dog food previously or something like that,
Right.
You wouldn't want to move into a slaughterhouse, right? You want businesses that didn't have anything to do with organic products prior, you know what I'm saying? Because those things will leave residual imprint in the building long after that business has closed and moved on and is just waiting for the next client, But if, I don't know, like a more innocuous business buys an old dog food factory, they're not as susceptible to the problems. It's the plants that are the issue. The plants are so sensitive, And so that's where I have to explain to people, you're not growing, cucumbers and tomatoes that have skin that you can wash and you can take, like, some sort of spray to or something like that. You're growing something that's sticky and catches anything that passes by it.
Yeah. The remediation starts before you get the plants in.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah. Yeah. And then, the other side of it too is it's not even necessarily like the building has an illness. It's like, our day-to-day lives from a microbe standpoint are pretty savage by comparison to, like, the cleanliness level you want in a cannabis facility. I mean, both you and I sitting here right now, we have 100,000 skin cells sloughing off of our body per minute.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like we look like the top of a glass of Sprite at like the, you know, we're effervescent, you know, at
Right.
at that microscopic level. And so, you know, with that, we pick up a lot of things in our day-to-day lives, sitting on the couch. You know, Aspergillus fumigatus, the largest producer of it is you pick up a lot of it from your own bedding.
Right.
Yeah. So, you know, with that in mind, it's like people tend to become almost as much, if not more so, a danger to the process compared to the environment that you're growing in. You know,
Totally.
It's one thing to grow like in a barn, but it's another thing to grow in street clothes in a barn, you know, like you're just kind of adding to the problem. And so a lot of it has to do with, you know, what are you doing around, you know, keeping a barrier between yourself and your plants.
Right. So can we talk a little bit about using agar plates and how you can test for pathogens and problems in your buildings? Let's say you're moving into a building and you want to figure out what the problems are.
This here is a Lighthouse AC100 air microbial sampler. This may look familiar to you. I think, in fact, you may have used this one. I think I did send this one to you, but
I think I see my thumbprint on it.
So what you see here, and I just want to make sure that the background doesn't obscure it, but basically you got a cover for the sampler. You have a sampling head, and you can see as I hold it up to the camera, there's a bunch of holes that are embedded in it. And then what you would do is you'd put a Petri dish here. You'd snap the cover on, you'd set the buttons up, and you would draw a specific amount of air for a specific amount of time onto the Petri dish, which then you would cap and then send off to a lab to have analyzed. You know, and we use malt extract agar. You know, it would be what's suggested because that's that, and I think there's another one. Tryptic soy agar or potato dextrose. I'd have to look that up, but I always use MEA. But you know, certain agars do not capture the things that you're looking for.
Right.
You know, for instance, powdery mildew doesn't plate at all.
Interesting.
I know. You have to use a different kind of device in order to capture powdery mildew. So that device, we don't sell them, we don't make them, but we made an adapter for their testing media. And so they use something called, I don't know if you've ever heard of like a Zephon biopump. They take something called an aerosol cassette, which is essentially, just to boil it down to like explain like on 5 terms, it's like a hockey puck, small hockey puck shaped plastic disc. Air can go in and flow out. And inside the center of that is like a little adhesive circle. And so air impacts the particles, you know, the airflow impacts the particles on an adhesive circle, and that can be looked at under a microscope for visual study. So you can't necessarily incubate it and grow something out on it. Think of it like a lift tape sample.
Yep.
It's like a lift tape sample of your air.
Cool.
Now, so
really good stuff.
Yeah. And then, you know, I mean, obviously I'm a big fan of swabbing as well. Because, you know, I just want to know as much data as possible, right? When you open up your Trollmaster, you open up your Arroyo or whatever, you want to be able to see like the graphic representation of the heartbeat of your garden, right? Yeah. You want to be able to look at that, and you can start to see the interplay between systems in here. So it's like, I mean, if I was able to, you know, for instance, you know, I could even show you what a lab report looks like to kind of give you an idea of what somebody can expect from a data standpoint. I'll share this with you. So this is a lab report where I've redacted the names to protect the innocent. And you can see here, like, if you look at column 1, does my mouse show up on this too?
Yes, it does.
Okay. So if you look over here, you see we tested Hall 1, Hall 2, dry cure in the attic area. And the reason that this hallway was actually just one hallway, but I took 2 tests at it because one day when I was there, I saw them transplanting cocoa because they didn't have any other available workspace. And so they have to do their work in the hallway. And I was like, I want to see if there's a difference because they're paying for the testing. Why not? I want to see, is there a difference between the area that they work in and the area that they don't work in? And then, so you can see here, like what it's listing is then it's listing the sample volumes. So we took 500 liters of air. And I don't think it has the time on here, but typically want to note how long of a sample you took. So then you can see under the fungal identification list, this is all of the things that we're looking for. If you have specifics in mind, you can always mention them to the lab and they can make a note on it to add it to their list of things to look out for, because some molds are very industry specific, So as you can see in Hall 1, we found 5 colony forming units of Aspergillus niger. And then the other end that wasn't being used for transplanting, we only found 2, but you can see where the concentration lies. And then we found some in their dry cure. We found a little up in the attic, which kind of says that maybe there was a leak up there that might be beginning to proliferate. And then, by the way, for what it's worth, this one down here, cladosporium, I don't think I've ever been in a facility that I've tested that's ever not had cladosporides.
Oh, wow.
But it's just a common plant pathogen. It's everywhere. Here's where it got really interesting in this particular lab report. And this was what was eye-opening, was this one here is Penicillium citrinum. And you can see here, this is off the charts compared to Aspergillus niger, right? 192 colony forming units, 302, 102, 300. I'm just going like, what is this and where is it coming from? Because that's not why they called me to come in.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they called me to come in because they were failing for Aspergillus niger. And I was like, well, let's just see what this thing captures, right? And then you can see they found a few other things like yeast colonies and stuff like that. I went to look back at this Penicillium citrinum and discovered that it is a mold that is on decaying matter and typically grain. It's found on grains like corn and rice and wheat. And as I think I'd mentioned earlier, having a cereal factory nearby, it turns out this is where I kind of came up with this realization and use it as a talking point, was these guys. Because when I did a Google overhead search, I discovered that they were like a quarter mile downwind from a General Mills cereal processing factory.
Wow.
Yeah. And then at another point in time, I took another test from the outside of the building, and the Penicillium citrinum was just as elevated. So, it's like, that's the level of eye-openingness, because when you get like a total yeast and mold count report, like, you want to know what the yeasts and the molds are, because that's going to be a key in being able to figure out the root cause of it. You know what I mean? So, when you get your Aspergillus fumigatus, as I said, the biggest, producer of it is our bedding. And, that might speak to like a cleanliness issue, where like a facility culture, hygiene culture issue, very easy for someone to scratch their head and then go back to touching plants.
Oh yeah. People touch your phone.
Or touch your
hair.
phone.
Yeah. People do this stuff all the time.
Yeah, your phone has 25,000 microbes per square inch.
So everybody that's watching, make sure to sanitize your phone regularly.
That's what I'm saying.
Right now.
Wipe it down. I mean, obviously best case scenario, you leave it out of the critical area, but I understand that's not reflective of reality. Mm-hmm. So it's like, what are the measures that you can take? Some people will wipe down their phones, right? Yeah. Some people will put it in a plastic bag, like a Ziploc bag.
For sure.
I'd be good with that, because here's the other thing about like wiping down your phones. What is contact time, right? So contact time, for those that don't know, is the minimum amount of time that a disinfectant needs in order to achieve the eradication. So if you're wiping down your phone and you just wipe it, and you didn't necessarily like leave it wet for a certain amount of time, or you took another towel and you dried it off, you're not getting the full potential of that disinfectant.
So let's talk about alcohol, because not all alcohol is created equal, especially if you're sanitizing surfaces with alcohol, which I would say that bleach is probably a lot better for hoplite and viroid, but as opposed to alcohol. But I learned something from Peter McGuire a long time ago, and it was the difference between 90% and 70%.
Yep.
I've used that over and over and over in conversation, but I think it's an important thing for everybody to learn the difference.
Yeah, a 90% is great for cleaning your pipes and bongs all day, right? Yeah. But like the reason that it's 90% alcohol is because it's only 10% water. So if you dumb down the alcohol to like 70%, you have 30% water, which means that the cleansing agent takes longer to evaporate from the surface. Yeah. And there go ergo gives you more, a longer contact time for it to achieve the eradication. Because here's the fun thing about, contact time, if you will, is that you might read on a label that it says like spray and leave wet for 10 minutes, but you have to know how long it takes for it to dry too. Because if you spray it and walk away and go do something else and it hasn't met that contact time, you're not getting the full potential from that disinfectant. So you actually would need to go back and wet it again, like do a second application.
Right.
That's the stuff that's all buried in the back on the labels and stuff. So, I use that example all the time. I mean, here I have a can of Lysol right here, right? Because I just carry cans of Lysol around. That's what I do, right? On these labels here, it literally says like, for, leave for SARS-CoV-2 on hard surfaces, 2 minutes, killed rotavirus, if left wet for 30 seconds. Like, so all of these things, it depends on what you're trying to kill.
Surface contact time is so important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And so, I'm a huge proponent of reading your labels. I'm a huge proponent of contacting manufacturers. I get questions all the time, like, do you recommend this cleanser or this cleanser? And it's like, if you use them properly, both of them should work.
Yeah.
As well, if you use them properly and they're designed to kill the thing you're trying to kill, then they should both do the job. So, but then I always tell people, I'm like, call the manufacturer. I assure you, a disinfectant manufacturer definitely wants to speak to their customers because they want to make sure that their customers are using their product correctly, that they're using it often so that they can sell you more of it, you know, and they want to make sure you are as knowledgeable as possible on their product.
Yeah. And most of them have pretty good customer service.
Yeah, as they should. And, and I can tell you, like here in cannabis, like, man, customer service is key, I mean,
people in cannabis aren't used to customer service though. I think like you have a problem with your weed or who grew your weed or whatever. You have questions about it. A lot of times Instagram, you might be able to get a reply, but back in the legacy years, that was all there was.
Yeah, I get it. And it's like, and the other thing is like, remember I speak primarily to cultivators, but and cultivators like have historically been big fish in their pond, know? And I mean, when I was growing, I liked the Sinatra treatment. Who doesn't like the Sinatra treatment just in life, And so it's like, if these growers, that I speak to on a day-to-day basis, they feel like I know what I'm talking about. They feel like I can answer their questions and that I pick up the phone and I'm prompt in my responses to them. Like it says worlds to like building trust, I mean, because, I'll say that it's one thing to get into a facility and get a bunch of filters up on the walls and in the ceilings and stuff like that. But that's not much of a career. Where the career comes in is helping these guys get to all the other questions that are related to microbe control outside of my filter. And that way they scale and expand to site number 2. And then site number 3, and then they recommend me to their friends. And then now I'm starting to get into their network and, all for just being this guy that's like trying to be of help, in a day and age where if you have a problem with Instagram, you can't call Instagram.
No,
you're the
they
product.
make it near impossible. Meta makes it near impossible to contact them.
I agree.
There's ways to contact them and, through chats and stuff.
If you're a paid advertiser, they're more apt to talk to you. But remember, like I said, the users of Instagram are the product. That's what they sell.
Right.
So as far as from a customer service standpoint, if my account got flagged because I can't get shown to non-followers, because my content is a little, toes the line of good taste, let's say that.
Racy.
Yeah,
right? A little racy, right.
We can talk about that for a second. Like that's the one thing I noticed is that I love this industry because lowbrow humor goes really far.
For sure.
You know what I mean? And so I'm in the business of talking about shit that's difficult to explain and isn't very interesting to learn. Mm-hmm. So, but you have to know it. So it's like, what's the way that I can make it palatable? So if I throw a dick joke in and yet the text underneath it actually teaches you something, I at least, that's the photos you see in my feed are like more to generate the shock and awe to get you to look. I mean, obviously they're tied to whatever I want to talk about in the post, in the text.
Right.
But at the end of the day, like, yeah, I mean, social media is this river, right? Think of it as a stream. And if you're standing at the shore, everything's going past you. And if somebody's not standing at the shore at the moment your information goes by, they miss it, know? And so, that's where the hashtags come in and blibbity blobbity blue. But my point in saying that is it's like, it softens the blow. You know what I'm saying? In the sense of like, this level of information can be really intimidating for some people.
And but let's make education fun. That's what we're doing here today. I feel like we're trying to make education fun, and there's no reason education and learning shouldn't be fun.
I completely agree. And not only that, but you're going to retain it more.
Yeah.
The retention level is huge. Like, I get people that tell me, they're like, you did this picture with this thing and now I can't unsee it, but that means I can't unforget it. You know what I mean? Or that means I can't forget it,
Yeah.
So to make a lasting impression, right. It can, and sometimes it has, but I've gotten a couple of "I'm triggered, please take this post down," and I'm like, well, you have a right to not follow me. I mean, I get it. The world we live in. Yeah. Right, exactly. But we're in sensitive times these days. It is what it is. But I definitely know that like the core of the industry loves having a good time because, the entire industry is rooted in, I mean, I don't know, like I just don't get sad and smoke weed. I want to be happy and smoke weed, like that's just not.
I would say it makes most people happy.
Yeah. It's an uplifting event, and
I believe it makes the world a better place. I believe people are in better moods because of it,
Oh, sure. No, absolutely. I mean, I've seen it firsthand with the effects of, from a medicinal standpoint, from people who have like, seen an ease in symptoms. Like, I mean, I'll tell you, when I was at Spectrum King, I had a boss who had 2 bad knees. He needed 2 knee replacement surgeries, and he wasn't getting them for one reason or another, whole other story. But what I can tell you is that my uncle here in Michigan makes a salve out of his plants, and everybody swears by it. And he sent me some, and I gave it to my boss, and he's like, "Get me more, please get me more." I mean, and he's like, "Listen, my pain didn't go away completely, but it went from a 9 to like a 3."
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm a big fan of there's not enough research, is what it comes down to.
No, and I think we have a stack of anecdotal proof, and we're starting to get a stack of actual, white papers and proof on that level. And I think like, you would watch Sanjay Gupta on 60 Minutes, and there's a kid that he gets cured of his seizures from THC or CBD or, any of these cannabinoids. I mean, how can you argue with the parent that wants to keep their kid healthy? And, it's so hard to argue the fact that it's still Schedule 1 is kind of crazy too.
Oh, completely. I mean, I done that whole story goes back to like paper mills and yellow journalism of like the 20s and 30s or whatever it was, and the reefer madness days where they demonized everything for social or corporate interests, and I mean, I seem to remember, like, historically, wasn't there some period of time where like every American farmer was required to grow some sort of section of hemp on their farm? I seem to remember that was a thing, like in the George Washington days.
Makes a lot of sense. I think we should go back to those ways.
I completely agree. I mean, I mean, smoking it aside, you get more paper per hectare, you get oils, you get all sorts of other usable things.
Remediation for soil. The fact is that it produces a lot more oxygen than trees do. I mean, there's all kinds of benefits.
Yeah, no, completely. And so, so from that standpoint, I think it's a sad state of affairs that there's not enough research. But as I understand it, if it does go to Schedule 3, that will open up the door for a lot more of that research, because the laboratories that can work with that level of study will now have access to it. Is that
well? Schedule 3 is a scary thing, right? So I'm all about descheduling, not rescheduling. And I think the last 3 episodes we've talked about the deschedule, not reschedule, because the second you make it a Schedule 3 drug, what happens to the rec market?
True.
You know, and I think there's a lot of unanswered questions. Like I understand that, you know, as alcohol and tobacco are controlled substances, we should have it as a controlled substance. But as far as like the fact that they want to turn it into a Schedule 3 drug, I'm not a huge fan. I think we need to deschedule it completely.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would say so too. There's no reason it should have ever been so in the first place, you know? So, totally. Yeah. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, to get people to that place where there's consistently, you know, clean product on the market, it's like, it's just requiring that you go to a place of, you know, being able to analyze your environment and being able to, you know, take small mitigation risks, mitigate or eliminate risks within the facility. So from that standpoint, you know, it's not even just about putting a magic box up in the ceiling before you operate. It's about, you know, what kind of mops are you using? You know, what kind of gowning are you doing? What kind of, like, are you fixing your cracks in your floors and your windows and what have you? You know, those types of questions, like all those other risks that fall under GMP.
Right. For sure. It's funny with the filter, we had the option of either putting it hidden up in the ceiling or putting it so that we can see it. And I feel like I want to see it. So I want to be able to talk about it when people come in the building. You guys have designed it to make it look nice too.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. And yeah, the nice part about it is it does come on, casters, so you can wheel it around if you want. We do have hardware for you to be able to mount it to the ceiling, mount it to a wall, you know, what have you. I mean, you know, ceiling and floor real estate in a cultivation facility is pretty premium, you know, so to be able to find the balance of the size of a unit that you can work with that puts out enough airflow for it to be worth it, that, you know, still has efficacy in its process.
Right.
And to be able to, you know, it's like, I mean, full disclosure, you know, we are an H13 HEPA filter, right? H14 exists, but you lose airflow. So there's a little bit of give and take. It's sort of like, you know, even going into the facilities, like just their native HVAC systems, you know, there's something called the MERV rating system for air filters. Some people don't know what it is. It stands for minimum efficiency reporting value. And what it is it's sort of a standard expectation of performance for that filter. So, and it's given a number. So like, for example, a MERV 13 filter will remove 90% of 1 micron and larger particles, whereas a MERV 8 filter will only capture about 60% or something like that. In fact, do I have a MERV chart? I might actually have a MERV chart here. I do. What do you know? You can actually see it. But here's the joke of it, or the give and take is the higher you go up in MERV rating, you get better filtration performance. But your mechanicals for your HVAC have to work a lot harder in order to push air through. So the efficiency tops out, because if your HVAC system can't support the heavier weighted filter because it can't move the air through it, you're going to experience cooling capacity issues. You're going to experience, stress on your HVAC system, you know, those types of things. And so that's where filter kind of comes in to just directly attack the particle problem. So we don't pry into HVAC. I don't even suggest it as a bypass. I'm just like, you put it in the room, let it recirculate its own air, and let the HVAC do its thing. And we're basically supplementing the filtration because, you know, when people are speccing in HVAC in their plan, more often than not, they're factoring for cooling capacity versus, you know, particle filtration. I get it. Yeah. So with that said, it's like, I'm not going to tell you to like rip out and replace hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of HVAC equipment. I'll tell you to put hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of filters in there. Right. No, I'm kidding. Huh?
Absolutely. That's great.
But no, I mean, at the end of the day, though, it's like, you know, not only can you immediately test filtration. So that's the cool part about versus like a lot of the other guys that are out there, the other types of technologies, is that I can put a particle counter on the bottom, I can put a particle counter on the top, and I can demonstrate efficacy in real time. You know what I mean? So like, in fact, wouldn't you know it, I might actually have that handy here. And let's see here. Let me see if I can open this up and share it with you. But I can literally, yeah, there it is. Let me share it. Share screen has stopped as the share window is closed. Okay, cool. Well, we're going to share it again. Here we go. So let me roll it back here for a second just to keep you in suspense here. So we got a filter unit here. And you can see we put a particle counter on one side. And you can see those numbers are counting, and you can see the time clock in the bottom right where it's counting seconds, so you know it's running. Show you the rest of the filter unit, and then we come to the output with a particle counter running, and all zeros. So I can prove that this thing is actually doing something in real time versus a lot of other companies that are out there that, you know, where you would have to do a lot of testing of the room in order to be able to understand if this thing's actually doing something. And well, my bud's past testing is anecdotal, but not very scientific.
Right.
I mean, well, good for you.
Yeah. But it's a beautiful world we live in where we can test this stuff.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, the level of awakening to like all of these little facets is, you know, at the same time, while it's cool, it definitely makes the industry a lot more complicated, you know? Right. But at the end of the day, you know, it's like so many people take pride in their process. And oftentimes you don't necessarily know if the cleaning that you're doing is actually cleaning. So, for example, a device common in food manufacturing, it's called an ATP meter. Have you heard of one? You familiar with those?
No. I mean, I know what ATP is.
Yeah, right. ATP, adeno triphosphate or something like that, right?
Androstenedione triphosphate.
Okay. So an ATP meter is basically like every living cell produces bioluminescence, sort of like, you know, when you go to the beach at certain times of year and you kick the water and it turns blue because of all the algae, right? The bioluminescent algae, or whatever animal or thing is making that bioluminescence. So everything has a natural level of bioluminescence. So this ATP meter is like roughly the size of like a large cell phone, maybe twice as thick, about that size. And it comes with, you buy a bunch of sticks where you break off the end and you swab it on a surface, and then you put it in the device and it spits out a number. And that's what it's calculating is how much bioluminescence is reflected back.
Wow.
So in other words, like, let's say you're at a cookie factory and you want to test your conveyor belt. You know, you can test it beforehand. You get what's called an RLI, relative light indicator, relative light number. I'm not familiar with them too deeply, but you get a number that it spits out, and then you execute your cleaning SOP, and then you test it again. And if you see a lower number, that's a validation that you've cleaned.
Right.
And that's, you know, a big misconception is because a lot of people walk into a room and they're like, smells clean, smells really clean in here. But it's like, in some cases, that could just be fragrance that the manufacturer.
Fabuloso. That could be Fabuloso.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. So, you know, it really does take the ability to, you know, validate it. But I don't know that cannabis is necessarily there yet. Like pharma manufacturing is very much there. They live and die by validation. Every claim they make, they have to be able to validate. And that includes cleaning. You know, and that, and, you know, following specific like SOPs, you know, standard operating procedures are becoming quite popular. I get a lot of requests for people to, you know, from people to write them. And
hey, I know home growers that write SOPs for themselves now. You know,
I don't, you know, it's funny. I don't write SOPs. I mean, like high level I do, but like, I don't write SOPs for other people as a service. Just, well, simply because, you know, when you're, you have to observe somebody's process. You know what I mean? There's not necessarily like some cookie cutter way.
No, there's no boilerplate SOP. It's so custom to the individual environment. You know, it's an amazing thing too if you get it down right.
I can tell you this, while there's like a million different ways to do something, the formatting is where I think that you're going to win.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like, for instance, is this the SOP training template? This is the SOP training template. So watch this madness here. Where is it? Here we go. So what I did was, a while back, I did a webinar. It's available on the FILTR YouTube page. And what I did was I did a webinar on building SOPs and building SOPs from a pharma and food manufacturing standpoint. So I took what they do and just put it in a template that makes everything very easy to understand. So, and we ran through all the different various parts. So you know, in pharma SOP writing, they have these very specific parts. They have the scope, you know, which defines where the procedure applies within the overall operation of the facility, because people want to know, well, how does what I'm doing fit into the process? Or the purpose? What's the purpose of doing this thing this way? You know, any specific definitions? Who's in charge of what? What materials are you going to need? Not just cleaning materials and equipment, but like, do you need safety gear? Do you need like ladders and, you know, extendable poles and what have you, you know? And then you finally get to the procedure where you actually list out the steps. If you have references that you want to include with there, you do that too. And then, you know, there's a validation and sign off section. And again, you know, like, cannabis isn't as huge on validating yet. But I can tell you this, that if it's not documented, it didn't happen.
Right.
You know, so I have to tell people as well, I'm like, you need to start getting down on documenting everything you do, you know, because
everything, who cleans the bathroom and when did they clean it? I mean, I think
right,
those are little things, but they're super important, believe it or not.
Absolutely. And, you know, here's the thing. It's not even just necessarily from a day-to-day operation standpoint.
Yeah.
What happens if you have a recall? What happens if you get sued by an employee who got hurt at your facility or something like that, or got sick at your facility? We heard about a case in Massachusetts, right? We all kind of got familiar with that one. Mm-hmm. And that had some special nuances to it. And it's unfortunate that it happened. But at the end of the day, you know, it's to be able to document everything you did can actually, in fact, provide you a legal defense in certain situations.
Absolutely.
You know, if you can sit there and say, like, you know, yes, this happened to this person, but it's not like we've been doing nothing. We have this diligent particle monitoring program, a diligent air sampling program. We document every time we clean something and every time we change something. And then at least it gives you some sort of plausible defense around, like, versus, you know, you're just growing backyard boogie indoors and you got my client sick. Or
some people,
you know,
don't document stuff because they want plausible deniability as well. So if you want to do it the right way, then document it. If you don't, then whatever. But documenting it is the way to go. I mean, especially, it doesn't matter whether you're breeding or whether you're doing tissue culture or whether you're doing cultivation. If you want to improve what you're doing, documentation is where it's found. You find the ways and the paths to improve what you're doing through documentation.
Right. Who kept a grow journal? I kept a grow journal. Right? You kept a grow journal. Why? And some of it was just simply as basic as you wanted to remember what you did last time so that if it worked, you could do it again.
For sure.
You know?
Well, I always changed recipes so often in the beginning when I was learning stuff. I was always changing stuff around, and they were these really complicated recipes and way more than what I would do now for cultivation. But
right? Yeah, when you're just buying like 17 different liquids and like most of them are 90. Yeah, most of them are 95% water anyway.
Seriously.
You know, but I'll tell you, know, and I will say that, you know, simplifying things, making things easier, MacGyvering your way around things. Like, just because I'm telling people to live between food and pharma doesn't necessarily mean you have to spend pharma money to get there.
Right.
You know, I mean.
But you got to have the knowledge. That's the one thing. Yeah,
but you got to have the knowledge to know what you need to change.
Right.
You know, and you have to be able to be willing to look at yourself, like hold the mirror up to your process and be willing to go, okay, this is not working.
Right. Cut the ego out and actually look at it, you know, from an outside perspective.
I just said that today to a client. I was at a site visit earlier today and I was like, you know, there is a distinct lack of CEO training in this industry, you know? Cause I kind of find it disturbing sometimes because like I'm seen as like this like ultra clean guy, and really in my reality, I'm a pig. But like as soon as I get to the facility door, As soon as I get to the facility door, that's like, I'm showered, I'm suited, I'm booted, I'm Tyvek'd, all my equipment sprayed down. I realize the risk that I pose. And I also have to be able to live it because I'm telling my growers, limit your visitors. Like all those times you see like, glamour models going into the cultivation facilities to do like marketing photo shoots for their client, it's like those classic shots of like some, hippie girl, like smelling the bud in her hand. And I'm like, you have 10,000 microbes per square inch. No, like,
yeah,
I get it. I'm definitely the killjoy of the industry sometimes, and, but at the same time, it's like, you are in a business, and
right.
If you want to do business as business is done, unfortunately, there's some give and take around where your level of fun is versus where your level of work is.
I have a serious problem. I love touching plants with my bare hands.
I know.
It's not the best thing, but it's terrible. And I've worked really diligently on wearing gloves most of the time. I just really enjoy touching plants with my bare hands and rubbing my fingers.
Make you a deal. If you can start to deploy a hand sanitizing regimen before you touch your plants, I'll allow it.
That's a great idea. We have hand sanitizing stations all over. So
yeah, I tell you what, man, we've been taught to wash our hands since kindergarten, man. Mm-hmm. And like, but we were never really taught how,
Well, yeah, you're supposed to say the alphabet. Is it 3 times?
Well, I'll tell you what. It actually, no, twice. Like you sing "Happy Birthday" twice, something like that.
Twice, right?
But here's where it gets interesting. Is it's not even just the amount of time that you spend; it's the amount of effort and direction.
Oh yeah.
So what you're looking at right here is what's called the aseptic hand washing technique, and this is used in hospitals. This is used in dental offices. It's used in pharma clean rooms. Like, it is considered an aseptic process, right, for aseptic manufacturing. And so what it starts with is your traditional rubbing your palms together, and then you're getting the insides of your fingers. You're interlacing your fingers. You're getting the backs of your fingernails. You're getting your thumbs. You're getting the fingertips, right? And then you're getting your wrists. And I do this little exercise when I do site visits. Like sometimes what'll happen is I'll do a site visit and I will, I'll bring somebody up and I will have them don a pair of gloves. By the way, the technical term for putting on gloves is donning, right? Now we don our gay apparel, right? The technical term is doffing, to take it off. Donning, doffing. Yeah, there you go. Trivia night, you're going to be a beast. Right. I'm just out. But anyway, so
Dolph Lundgren is what they're going to call me.
So, oh my God, that's an Instagram post idea. I'm taking it. Anyway, so what I'll do is I'll have somebody come up and I'll say, okay, I'm going to put some hand sanitizer in your gloved hands, right? They're dark gloves, so you can see the difference between the dry and the light, and the dry and the wet. And I'll say, wash your hands like you would normally wash your hands at home or here at work after using the bathroom or something like that. And so they'll wash their hands and I'm like, okay, now take a look. Do you see all the dry spots? Do you see all the spots that didn't get hand sanitizer on them? And they're like, I do. And I'm like, okay, now try this method that I just showed you. And we do it together in front of everybody. And I'm like, now take a look at your hands, completely covered.
Awesome.
Yeah. And so it's just a great way of, because I mean, even if you think about it, like when people grab the gloves out of the middle of the box, right? Like most glove manufacturers lay their gloves alternate, right? Like, and you pull it from the middle like Kleenex, right? Like a tissue box. And, but you're pulling it with the finger and you're pulling on the part that is invariably potentially going to be touching.
You're totally contaminating the gloves.
Right. Yeah. In pharmaceutical environments and in medical environments and stuff, their gloves come individually wrapped and they're cuffed. Right. And so that way they could just slip into them and put them on one at a time.
Makes sense.
And so, with that, it's like, those little changes and about keeping that barrier between people who, because again, it's like humans are oftentimes the problem until robots are starting to be able to grow. Right. Which we don't want to happen anyway. And you're never going to get the same level of quality. Sorry.
Smoking that terpless robot weed. That's good.
Right. Oh my God. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, that makes me a big, germ nerd. to the industry, unfortunately.
No, I mean, that's really good stuff. I think the people that watch my show are going to love it. I think it's always good. The viewers out there are going to really enjoy it. And I'd love to do we could do a seminar one of these days together.
I would love to. I mean, if you wanted to assemble your audience together in one place, or maybe we can run through it like a co-hosted type of co-branded type of thing,
Yeah.
And you just leave it out on the web. People need to know this information. That's the problem. They don't know where to get it. And that's, and that's where I want to try to be of help, because when you better understand the problem, the solution makes more sense. And as you can see or hear, the kids are calling.
Good stuff, man. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the show today. If somebody wants to find out more about you, where can they get a hold of you?
Sure. Well, they can always reach me, via Instagram. I'm under Dyslexic Stoner 402. And, with that in mind, it's, I'm very responsive to my account and answer questions all the time. And you can always reach out to filterscience.com. That's FILTR science.com. That's always the best ways to be able to find me.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time. And I look forward to talking to you really soon in the near future. We got a whole bunch of stuff to talk about outside this. So.
Thanks a bunch, man. I appreciate it. Wow.
Definitely.
You're amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cheers.